In this lecture, we will discuss the endocrine system. Part 1, we'll look at the general characteristics. Endocrine system consists of several gland-like organs that produce hormones, and these hormones will have a global function in the body. Endocrine system works with the nervous system to help maintain homeostasis in the body, to help maintain a balance and a proper internal environment. Endocrine system is made up of cells, tissues, and organs called endocrine glands. They secrete hormones into body fluid, for example, blood. Hormones diffuse into the bloodstream to act on a specific target in a different location. So that differentiates from exocrine glands. So there are two types of glands in our body: endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Exocrine, X is outside, so products are secreted into ducts into the outside environment of the body. And we saw some of this when we were discussing the integumentary system. And we also see this in the digestive tract. Endocrine glands secrete product directly into body fluids such as blood, and they travel in the bloodstream to the affected target cells. If we look at a schematic representation, we see exocrine glands. These cells produce the secretions into the gland, and that will be released to the outer environment. Could be a lumen like a gut, or could be even outside like the skin. Endocrine glands will produce the hormones or secretions, and they will directly go into the blood, which will then go into the circulation and target an organ at a different location. So please know the difference between these two types of glands. Some organs, like the pancreas, has both an exocrine and an endocrine function as well. So the exocrine function will produce certain digestive enzymes that will be released to a duct, and they will then go into the GI tract to help with digestion. They also will have endocrine cells and organs that will produce hormones that will be released to the bloodstream. Endocrine system functions to communicate with cells using chemicals called hormones. Like the nervous system uses neurotransmitters, we discussed, that are used between the synapses, communicating between different nerve cells. In the endocrine system, there are chemicals that are known as hormones, and we will look at some of these types of chemicals in the next few slides. Endocrine glands and their hormones regulate a number of metabolic processes within the cell and in the whole body. So by regulating these metabolic processes, it helps maintain homeostasis. So this shows the difference between how neurons communicate and how the endocrine glands function. Neurons have a signal, an impulse that they will conduct through the axon, and at the point of a synapse, they will release the neurotransmitters that will then carry the message over to either the effector organ or to another neuron. In endocrine glands, they will secrete the hormones that they produce into the bloodstream, and this will travel, and once it gets to the target cell, they will carry out a response. We have several different major endocrine glands in our body. They include the pituitary gland, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, pineal gland, reproductive glands such as the ovaries and testes, the kidneys, and the thymus. So they are shown here in this schematic. In part 2 of this lecture, we will look at each of these glands and talk about their location, what their structure, what hormones they produce, and their function. And again, this points out to the location of the major endocrine gland. Here we have the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. We saw these when we discussed the diencephalon when we looked at the brain. So that's between um, the cerebrum and um, the brain stem. It's located between these two structures. We have the parathyroid glands and the thyroid glands. So number one structure here would be the thyroid gland, and we will have the parathyroid gland located beneath that. And the gland shown here is the thymus, mainly seen in small children. As we grow, this gland becomes smaller as its function becomes less important in adulthood. We have the adrenal glands that are located right above the kidneys, and the structure shown here is the pancreas. And we have the ovaries in females and testes in males. Hormones are of two different types, two broad categories. They are divided depending upon their structure. They can either be steroid hormones or non-steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are derived from cholesterol. So they will have this ring-like structure forming steroid structures. Non-steroid hormones include amines, peptides, proteins, and glycoproteins, so sugars and proteins. So if it is with cholesterol and related to lipids, they will be steroids. And anything that is to do with proteins and carbohydrates, glucose type of structures, they will be non-steroidal hormones. So it is important to know the difference between these two types of hormones and how they act. And we will get into that detail shortly. So steroid hormone action. Steroid hormones, since they are lipid-based, cholesterol-based, they are able to travel through a cell membrane. So they can travel through the cell membrane, go through the nucleus, and they can affect the DNA and transcription, the fact of protein synthesis. They can affect this directly by going through the cell membrane. And students do not need to know the steps of this, but remember that steroid hormones can go through the cell membrane and carry out its function. Now, this is different to non-steroidal hormones, as since they are not lipid-based or cholesterol-based, they cannot go through the cell membrane. So what they will do is they will come and activate certain receptors that are located on the cell membrane. And by activating these receptors, they will now initiate a pathway, a certain signals that will go through the cell and then affect protein transcription or affect the synthesis of proteins. So steroidal hormones, they can travel through the cell membrane directly and perform their function. Non-steroidal hormones will activate cell surface receptors that will then activate a signaling pathway to carry out its function. We talked about how hormones are produced by endocrine glands, put into the bloodstream, and they travel across the body to go to their target organ. We also have some hormones that act locally. These are called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are lipids. They are produced from fatty acids and arachidonic acids. These prostaglandins are being synthesized, and when they are produced, they affect organs that are located close by. So prostaglandins can be used and then inactivate after their effect. And we see here that prostaglandins can be used in either reducing inflammation or even increasing inflammation. So local response. The last major thing that we will talk about in this particular part of the lecture is controlling of hormonal secretion. We discussed how they are produced in endocrine glands and then put into the bloodstream. So hormone levels are very precisely regulated. They are only produced when there is a need, and when the need is met, they stop being produced. To be able to control this, endocrine glands or system uses a negative feedback mechanism. A negative feedback mechanism means is if there is a need for a certain hormone or certain item in the body, hormones will be produced. And as it goes through performing its action, there will be signals that come back to the starting organ and say, now we have enough, so stop producing that particular hormone. So that could be, say, for example, if the hypothalamus activates and produces certain hormones, that will go and perform its function, and some intermediate product can come back to the hypothalamus or even the anterior pituitary gland and say, now we don't need it anymore. Similarly, even in the nervous system, when there's an action that happens, the action then comes back and gives it a stop signal saying, we don't need that anymore. And again, it also could be that even in the endocrine system, where you produce a certain item, the action, the final product, when it comes to critical mass, it can come back and be a negative feedback mechanism. Once we talk about specific organs, we will revisit this and look how it functions for each of the different glands. So negative feedback mechanism controls hormone release. Negative feedback system, a gland is sensitive to the concentration of the substrate it is regulating. As the hormone level rises and it performs its effects, then further secretion is inhibited by the negative feedback mechanism. And this helps maintain the internal environment, the homeostasis of our body. We will pick this up on part 2, where we look at specific endocrine glands and their function.